Madam President, I rise to speak on the pending business before the United States Senate. The Senate's just achieved cloture on the motion to proceed to the Emergency Supplemental Funding Bill. So let me explain to the people who are watching this either in the gallery or on C-SPAN. The Senate has creaky rules, and these creaky rules were to make sure that we would cool the passions that could be raging in the nation on any given time, so that we could duly give consideration, that debate would be diligent, and we wouldn't be gripped by the fire of the moment or the passion of the moment. And I appreciate that. But instead, what these rules now do is they take a lot of time for us to get to the meat of the matter. Because what we're debating now is the motion to proceed to a legislation related to supplementing existing funding to meet new emerging crises. The Senate votes on a motion to proceed not on the bill itself, but should we even go to the bill? So what we're debating now is, should we go to the bill on the Emergency Supplemental Funding Bill? And you know what, Madam President? I want to say yes. Yes, vote on the motion to proceed. Let's get on with it. Let's have a real debate with real issues. There's 30 hours that have been set aside to debate on whether we should proceed. I'm here to say, let's proceed, let's yield back our time, and let's get on the bill. We have a lot of things we need to get done in the next 48 hours. I want to see this Emergency Supplemental Funding Bill be debated and voted on. We have 3 elements in this bill that meet compelling need. Need for our neighbors in our own country, need for our treasured ally, the State of Israel, and also need for a crisis at the border where children literally are marching across Central America in search of refugee status. We need to deal with all 3 of these issues. This bill, Madam President, this emergency funding bill, is about neighbor helping neighbor. First of all, it's about our own country. Wildfires are raging in the West. Over the last year, 39 states have faced wildfires. Right this very minute, 8 Western states are coping with unbelievable wildfires, some of the largest fires in their history. And what happens? Vast amounts of territory are going up in smoke. We're losing towns, businesses, homes. Our firefighters are being worn out, our first responders, and they need help. This legislation will provide $615 million to these states facing this horrific Armageddon-like emergency. In addition to that, this legislation includes $225 million to replenish the rockets that are being used by Israel, deploying technology called the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is a missile defense system that is rejecting and destroying the rockets that are being sent into Israel by Hamas. The technology is working, but they're using up the rockets and they need to be replenished. Then there is the humanitarian crisis at our border. Here we have $2.7 billion to meet the needs of children seeking refuge in order to be able to deal with placing them while we determine their legal status, but also being able to fight the crime of the narco-traffickers and the human traffickers that are creating this surge of the children. This is a total emergency funding for $3.57 billion. Now, why do we call it an emergency? Well, it's because under the law, you can't just say, oh, this is an emergency. In order to get emergency funding, you have to meet the criteria of the Budget Control Act of 2011. The need has to be urgent. It has to be temporary. It has to be unforeseen. And it either is to prevent the loss of life or in the interest of our national security. All three of these areas of funding meet this need. Now, under emergency funding, it means that there are no offsets. It means that we don't take from another important program being funded by the United States government to meet that need. So in order to meet the needs of Iron Dome, we don't take from other national defense money. It will replenish that. When we go to help the wildfires, we don't take from other important areas in agriculture or interior or in other bills. This will help not only meet the need, but also not place an additional burden on other communities. Now, I'm going to talk about the urgency. These firefighting is really needed now. When you listen to the senators from the western states, when you see the photographs, literally, parts of our country are going up in smoke. Now, the Forest Service agency that actually is in charge of dealing with this will run out of money in August. And as I said, last year, these wildfires burned in 39 states. When you look at Iron Dome, Hamas, this violent terrorist organization that actually rejects Israel's right to even exist, from their tunnels are showering Israel with these rockets, and Iron Dome, Arrowhead, and David Sling are a missile defense system designed to help them. The short, up-close missile defense system is Iron Dome. It will make sure that we replace the interceptor rockets that are being used to protect them against this showering of rockets. The Israeli embassy spoke to my staff yesterday. We've got over 2,000 Hamas rockets fired just in the last week. So Israel needs to replenish itself. Then there's the issue of the surge of unaccompanied children presenting themselves at our border asking for refugee status. In order to really be able to meet this crisis, and they're coming in thousands, 59,000 kids have come this year. What we know that the Immigration and Customs Service, if we don't meet this emergency funding, will run out of money in August. Border Patrol will run out of money in early September. Now, that doesn't mean that the Border Patrol agents or the Immigration Customs Enforcement agents will stop working. It means the Department of Homeland Security, 22 agencies, will take money out of existing funds to fund this. So it means that they could take money out of federal emergency management just as we're going into hurricane season, just as we're in high tornado season. We could be taking money out of FEMA to put it in border control unless we do this emergency funding. We've got to do it. Health and Human Services runs out of money in August. They're the ones that when the children present themselves while their legal status is being determined must be taken care of in a humane way, the American way. We don't treat children in an abusive manner. It means we will feed them, we will clothe them, we will shelter them, we will meet any emergency health needs that they have, and we need to do that while we determine their legal status. My bill, the supplemental I presented, helps accelerate the determination of their legal status. My legislation and this supplemental spending actually provides more immigration judges, legal representation for the children. That's so that we can quickly determine, do they have a right to asylum while we are also taking care of them? We need to be able to do that. But, Madam President, I would hope that others would get the briefings that I have, visit the border the way I did to find this out. The reason we have a crisis at the border is because we have a crisis in Central America. And this legislation provides the money to do this. Oh, yes, people say, root causes like poverty have been going on for years, Senator Mikulski. This doesn't only deal with poverty. We want to go and work with the governments of Central America to really go after the narco traffickers, the human traffickers, and the coyotes engaged in smuggling. Why do we want to do that? Madam President, if you ask these children, where are the hometowns that you are from, they will give us the names of little cities and little towns. And if you look at their poverty rate in these communities have been consistent for a number of years. That's a sad circumstance. But if you look at the crime rate, the murder rate, the recruitment into violent gangs, the recruitment into human trafficking with the threat of death or torture, that's where these kids are coming from. We've got to go after the criminals in Central America and not treat these children like they are criminals. We cannot treat children in this country like they are the criminals. Go after the real criminals in Central America using our assets, working with the assets in Central America to do this. They have programs and they have plans. Honduras is a great example of what they're trying to do. They need our help. If you don't want the crisis at our border, deal with the crisis in Central America. And that also deals with our insatiable, unending, vociferous appetite for drugs. The drugs have created the narco-terrorists. Once you start selling drugs, you are willing to sell women and children like commodities. And if you are willing to sell women and children like commodities, then that's where the vile, repugnant practice of human trafficking and human smuggling and even a new form of slavery, sexual slavery, begins. Now, these children are on the march. And when you talk to these children, they're terrific children. They're brave. They're gutsy. You talk to the boys, they don't want to be parts of gangs. They want to get out. They want to get out. So they start this long march from their home country through Mexico to make it to the Rio Grande, and on rafts and swimming and so on, they make it to our border. You talk to the girls. The girls want to go to school. The girls want to get an education. They don't want to be recruited into these vile, vile circumstances. So these are earnest, hardworking children who want to have safety, who want to have a future. And we want to be able to see, do they, by interviewing them, qualify for refugees status? And if they don't, they will have to go back home. But if they do, they get to stay here. So they deserve the protection under the law. So we need to pass this legislation. This bill is a funding bill. It doesn't include immigration legislation. We say those kinds of things can either be brought up in another way, another method here, but this is a clean funding bill. When I say clean, it means it has no legislative language on it related to immigration. So, Madam President, I hope that we can pass this legislation. Now, I've listened to my own constituents, and many of them are saying to me, hey, Barb, we're not against these kids. And in fact, recent polling says 69% of the American people say if they're refugees, we should take care of them, and they have a right to determine their legal status. But my constituents, many of them say, hey, Barb, what about us? What does this mean? You're going to spend more money? What about my schools? When do we get help? My kids need help. They need school. They need health care. You talk to families now, they're getting ready to go back to school. They can't wait. Many parents can't wait for sales tax-free day in Maryland, where you can get your backpack and your school supplies and your little clothes and shoes. My God, the cost of kids' shoes now are a small fortune, and they'll outgrow them by the time they get to Thanksgiving. Parents are looking for bargains, for deals, to be able to help this. They are not hostile, but they wonder about them. And I want to say to them, I hear you. I was touched by a very poignant story over the weekend about how we have a food bank at Steelworkers Hall in Baltimore. Bethlehem Steel closed. It will never, ever, ever come back. The Steelworkers of America who contributed to United Way were always the first in line if a blood bank was necessary. Now, many of those who lost their job are using the very food bank that they once donated to. That story was so moving because we have lost our manufacturing. We've just lost the bill earlier today on bringing jobs back home, something I know the general lady, the presiding officers for, I assure them for, and so on. So I know that American families are hurting. And yes, they are. But I want to bring out that this cost of this bill, the cost of this bill is the same amount of money as we're going to spend on training the Afghan security forces. Did you know that? So we're going to spend $4 billion, that's billion like in Barb, not million like in Mikulski, $4 billion to train the Afghan security forces. We don't, and I'm not going to debate the merits of that, but we can spend money all over like that, and we can't spend money at our border and also threats to our border because of narco-terrorism that breeds other vile, repugnant, heinous behavior. I think we've got to get real here. And the reason I want a supplemental that's urgent and meets that criteria is that we don't have to take the money from other important programs that do help America's family in education, in health, in job retraining, in order to bring our jobs back home. So, Madam President, I really do hope we pass this bill. Not spending money won't save money. It means that we'll just take out of existing programs, and the American people will pay for it doubly. They'll pay for it through inaction, which will ultimately cost more. They'll pay for it because they'll lose the programs that they thought they were going to have access to, or there will be limited availability. We have the chance here now to help our neighbors in our western states. I know Wisconsin has been hit by it terribly, and we're so sorry for the loss of property and the danger to that community. It will help a treasured ally, Israel, which we must, and also we will help our own country. And the way to protect our border is two ways. Fight it in Central America and also show what we stand for. The children are applying for refugee status. They should have their day in court and under the law proceed. So, Madam President, we're now on this motion to proceed. Let's get on with it. Let's yield back our time. Let's get to the bill. Let's get the job done. And I hope that at the end of the day, the vote will be yes. Madam President, I yield the floor.